Okay, let's get started with this. We'll talk about testing JavaScript with Jasmine. My name is Tyrrell. I work at People Admin as a Rails developer in Austin, Texas. I'm originally from Chicago, but I'm living here now. I'll talk about People Admin a little bit later, but talent management application, we have about 600-700 universities we do the internal, external job management for and whatnot. I want to get going by give you the agenda, see if this is what you want to see. I appreciate you coming here. I want to make good use of your time. I know you had a choice. You chose this session. I want to set your expectations correctly. So this is basically an intro to Jasmine talk. So it's an intro to how do you test JavaScript using the Jasmine BDD testing framework. So if you have any experience with Jasmine, you might already know this stuff. Feel free to exit now, or maybe you'll pick something up. But basically, intro Jasmine talk, see how easy it is to use JavaScript testing framework, which is something that's really cool. And also, I know that I'm standing between you, and I believe it's chicken fried chicken today for lunch, so, with gravy and mashed potatoes, so I am pretty excited about that as well. There we go. Oh, as you see, talk about unit testing, talk about what Jasmine is and isn't, show syntax comparisons with RSpec, and then just show a bunch of different scenarios where Jasmine can come into play, which is, with plain JavaScript, no Ruby, with testing against jQuery, using Ruby without Rails, with Rails, with Evergreen, which is a really cool gem that kind of packages it all up for you. And then also how you do things like how you run it headlessly, and then just what other cool things are. You can use it with CoffeeScript and how would you do things like that. So we're going to briefly cover a lot of stuff. I have a lot of slides, a lot of code and configuration and setup, but we're going to blow through it, and it should give you a big breadth of all the stuff that you can do with this cool framework. So why am I talking about JavaScript at a Ruby conference? I guess this doesn't seem as funny anymore because this is like the third talk in a row about JavaScript. But well, a lot of us use Ruby, obviously, with Rails or Sinatra. So we have views, and we tend to have JavaScript in these views. And it's a gap, I would say, in a lot of applications, definitely a lot of applications that we don't have tested, definitely not unit tested. A lot of us use integration type frameworks to try to cover these things, but that doesn't always cut it. And I'll carry on and talk about it later. But it's a very important part of your app that a lot of times we just kind of throw out there, and if it's in the view, we don't test it as well. And that's crazy. I'll show you how easy this is. You can do this, and you can do it well. So why unit test JavaScript? Make this bigger. Well, it's code, right? I mean, we test our code. It can be very, very complex. Lately, with all the stuff that we do the client side and a lot of server side just doing back-end stuff like APIs, throwing things into views, a lot of processing is done in the client now, and it gets very, very complex. So this is code. Anywhere there's code or complex code, we definitely need to have coverage on it so that we can feel confident and do a good job with it. Also, mentality's been changing a lot lately. Of course, with as we know, the explosion of these JavaScript frameworks, JavaScript is not seen as a toy language. It hasn't been seen as a toy language for a while. And now that it has the respect that you could say it deserves, we should test it as we should. There's perceived problems that testing JavaScript is hard to get started with, and I'm going to show you that that's just silly. I mean, this is so easy to get going, and such a familiar thing that you do in your backend code that it's really silly not to do this. And with JavaScript just being such an important part of our application these days, this is something that we need to do and need to start looking into. I grabbed this from Glenn's talk yesterday. It made a lot of sense to me. So external tests don't help us with internal design. Glenn mentioned this in his keynote. And that's really important because with the advent of things like Cucumber and just Capybara testing, the external integration through the flow, through the stack, that's great, and I love it. I like to do it. But if you're not unit testing, you're not actually driving out the design beforehand, and that's something that could really be missed by not unit testing JavaScript. Also, the second Twitter quote I have: there is only one way to go truly fast. Do the best job you can. Anything else is slower. Now I take this one to heart because people say that unit testing, it slows you down. But the way I see it, what slows you down is your deployment blowing up. What slows you down is when you try to refactor some code and it, breaks half your application. So with the coverage going, unit test coverage, you get a better designed internal code structure, and also confidence that it's not going to break. I understand that Obi talked about it yesterday with you don't need to test everything, or he was basically saying that you can spike stuff out, prototype stuff out, see what you want, don't test that. I get that, I get that, but production code needs to be tested. It needs to have tests around it so you can feel confident and do a good job. One thing I wanted to mention was testing. It's not easy, I'm all right at it. I'm getting better every day because I work at it. If you're new to testing in general, it's not something easy. It's intimidating. It took a while to realize, oh, I'm calling this method to see what it gets back. It took a while for that to click. And this is hard stuff. You work on it for years and years, and you get better as you go on, and you write better code through that. Don't be this guy. The obligatory meme. It's not brain surgery, rocket surgery. That if you deploy something, it blows up. Because you don't know what it's going to do. You change some code, and you have no idea what effect it will have on your other parts of your system. If you have good coverage, you have more confidence that you're not going to get paged in the middle of the night. So what is Jasmine? It's a JavaScript testing framework created by Pivotal Labs, Rails consultancy, and I'm sure you've all heard of Pivotal Tracker. It's a common tool that many of us use. There are other JavaScript testing frameworks. You've probably heard of QUnit, and that's the one that the jQuery project uses, right? But QUnit is more of like a assertion type framework, more of like a test unit syntax, where Jasmine is a BDD style syntax. So I'm not going to get into TDD BDD type structure, but it's something that with using RSpec, it just kind of makes sense to use also a BDD type framework like Jasmine. What is it? Super easy to use. I'll show you that very soon. A very familiar RSpec-like syntax. And there's lots of advantages to that. One is when you're switching context a lot, right? If you're switching context over to unit test some JavaScript, and it's the same flow and structure of RSpec, then you're not switching your mindset as much. You can stay focused on the same type of syntax and fluidity. It has Ruby Gem for Ruby, Rails, Node.js, everything you ever want to test is covered. It's been done. It's there for your disposal. It's easy to plug into a CI server, headless or not. We'll cover that as well. It does not require the DOM. It can, but it does not require it. You can still test it, and I'll show you that. It doesn't depend on any other JavaScript framework, so you don't need jQuery or Prototype to use this. And also, there's a really big community around it. Lots of plugins, and it's really, really being developed. I did a version of this talk 6 months ago, and just how many plugins have come out since then or evolved. It's really exciting stuff. So big community around this. So this is a very safe framework you can get in and use and not worry about it going away right now. What is Jasmine? It's not an integration testing framework, right? It's for unit testing. It's for testing your code in isolation. It's more like a test unit RSpec, like I said, not a Cucumber or Capybara. You're not testing your stack. You're testing little segments of code in isolation. I'm going to start kicking into some of the syntax now. I have the RSpec on top, or the side, as you'll see in Jasmine at the bottom. So just take a look at this right off the bat. It looks very, very similar. Differences: you have blocks as opposed to anonymous functions. Of course, with the describe in RSpec, you can remove the quotes and have it new up an instance and reference that as the subject inside the farther down blocks. you cannot do that with Jasmine's JavaScript, straight JavaScript. Also, with RSpec, you can, of course, use context, other type of aliases. Jasmine is straightforward. You get describe and it, and that's about it. Setup and before and afters, with RSpec, you set your instance variable inside the before block. You can, of course, grab it anywhere inside the other methods. With Jasmine, it's JavaScript, so the scoping is more of an issue. It doesn't have the, I don't want to say Ruby magic, but it's JavaScript, so you have scoping involved. So you see, this is just simple syntax to set up and tear down with Jasmine. Here's some different type of matchers. You'll see that with RSpec at the top, you have your, up your method, up your object, you call stuff on it, .should, and you can underscore not to do things with it. With Jasmine, everything is based off the expect. So you chain everything off there. So if you want to negate it, it's expect dot not dot to equal. Instead of with RSpec, it's calc add should not. So there's only one real thing you have to worry about with Jasmine: expect, and just chain things off it. See, not to equal. So we're chaining anything we want to test what's being done inside there. And just to obviously explain what's happening here is we throw the calc method inside expect, call add on it. It returns a result, which there we're seeing it's equal to 2. So this is just a very simple calculator type example. Debate around whether you should use one expectation per, per it net block in there. That's very debatable, and I believe just save space here. Some people say it's a lot slower if you break these all out. I heard that 2 days ago at Noel Rappin's BDD training. But it's a lot nicer to break these things out into single assertions per statement. There's a ton of matchers. Just want to show you what you can use. I'm not going to go through all these, but you get the point, right? You throw your method in there, execute it, and then the result gets returned, and you see if it's less than something, more than something, null, etc. So it's very simple to get going. Custom matchers, this is just the RSpec. The Jasmine's not on this page, just so you guys have context. This is how you do it inside RSpec. Define it in the spec namespace. You define b greater than 0 or b0 when subtracting. These are just simple, contrived matching type examples. In Jasmine, same type of thing. This before each, in the spec helper, before each will throw these in front of every other spec, so they're accessible, so you can do custom matching. Simple stuff. I have a comma there, so I put a couple different within the same before each. Adding a couple different matchers, and then I'll show you how you use these. No sweat, right? It should be greater than 0. Expect dot to be greater than 0, which is what I just defined here. Expect to be 0 when subtracting. So this, if you find yourself doing a lot of the same type of assertions, this way you can encapsulate it in one spot. Put in your spec helper.js file. I'll show you where you put that in a minute, and then access them throughout the app. Stubbing with RSpec is the built-in stub. Where basically, if add's called, it's sort of, hey, no matter what, we're going to return 3. So if you call calc.add 1 plus 1, since the stub comes in there, basically intercepts it, returning 3, and that will pass. With Jasmine, there's spies. And what Jasmine says a spy is, with onSpy, you remove the specified function from the object and replace it with a spy. So the spy will absorb all calls to that method, and you can optionally chain return method out to it. So you can optionally chain. So if you throw the spy in there with calc, you throw the object and the method in there, optionally return something with it, and it'll absorb calls to that method, and then either return something or just ignore it, put it in space, just absorb it. So really easy to get going. Stubbing with spies, Jasmine, very simple stuff. I just talked a little bit about TDD. I'm not going to beat this into the ground or anything. But in case you're not as familiar with it, I'm going to show just a little TDD flow through screenshots. Well, screenshots through my slides. Basic gist of it: you're filling test, you make it pass, you make it better. You write a test before you write the code to make the test pass. I'll cover this quickly. Some of you have probably heard this a million times, but if not, this will be educational. Why do I like TDD? This is what I wanted to really cover, is that For one, it's hard, attention span, right? It's hard to keep focused on one, it's easier to keep focused on one thing at a time as opposed to, I have this app and I'm doing stuff with it, and, what do I work on next, right? You write a failing test, you know what you're working on, you know what you need to fix. Failing test, write the code, make it pass, move on, for another failing test. So you're always focused, you're not going down rabbit holes, getting off on tangents. That's why it's important to me. It helps you design your API because you're literally using your tests before, you're designing your API as you go because you're testing it. You're calling these methods inside your test before the code even exists. So you'll see right off the bat if you have a wonky API or something difficult, or you need more parameters passed in to get the results you need. So it really helps you design your API. Another is it helps me sleep at night because, as I said earlier, I can deploy and not be scared to death that something's going to break. It keeps me moving fast, as I showed the Uncle Bob tweet earlier. You make a change, you run the test, you move on. You don't have to open up the browser, click a bunch of stuff, log into the app, etc. You can keep moving fast, and this is how I move fast. People may have different flows. And it gives me confidence in major refactorings. I can make changes to code, run the test, move on. I don't have to test every little crevice of the application. Okay, I'm going to show you real quick how you would do, Jasmine with vanilla JavaScript. So this is basically no Ruby involved. This is just JavaScript. So this is how you would, a little TDD flow for this example, and how you test something with Jasmine. You just go to payable.github.com, download the latest zip, extract it into a folder. I hope you can see this all right, because this is extraction of the zip file. You have a spec runner HTML, various lids and specs. So default, unzip it, you get some example specs and source. So you can actually look at how you would utilize the framework. Also, there is in the spec helper file, there's also some custom matchers. So right out of the box with the zip file, you have examples of how to test stuff, how to write custom matchers, and also, that's all you need. So this is it. This is JavaScript. I'm going to delete. You hit the spec runner.html in a browser, pull it up, it runs a test for you. So you see 5 specs, 0 failures. And you could click on show pass, show skipped, or run all. You could expand this farther, as we'll see a little bit later on. So I delete the files that came with it and throw in my own calculator JavaScript and calculator spec JavaScript. I probably shouldn't have written the calculator JavaScript file yet, but I just want to show you how the folder structure works. This is the default folder structure. You can tweak this. I'll show you later how to tweak it easier with things like Evergreen. Open it up, 0 specs, 0 failures, right? 2 files, empty, nothing in them. Move on, write the spec first before I write the code. Describe calculator. This is obviously we're doing JavaScript stuff now. Throw in the calc. Before that, I'm going to new up this calc JavaScript object. As we see here, it should return the sum of adding 2 together. It should equal 2. I mean, this is pretty straightforward stuff. Go back to our browser, refresh it, bang. 1 spec, 2 failures, right? Why is that? Obviously, I haven't defined a calculator function yet inside my calculator.js file. And also, it's saying that calc is undefined because we're trying to new up something that doesn't exist. So move into calc.js, create a function, go back to the browser, refresh it, there. Okay, only 1 failure now. We're saying, hey, calc.add, what is add, right? We haven't defined that yet. Move on, add this function, num1 plus num2, return that to 2. Hey, 1 spec pass. So this is a flow of how you can test JavaScript. I'll show you a little bit easier later how you can do this without opening your browser. But right out of the box, create a spec file, create a calculator file, and write some describe specs, and you're good. I mean, that's it. This is Jasmine. It's easy, super easy. How would you do this with Ruby then, without Rails? So there's a gem involved with this, right? So, gem install Jasmine, installs a bunch of stuff. I had a blank gem set here. You notice it installs Selenium WebDriver, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And also it uses RSpec and stuff under the covers to do some of these things, apparently. We're going to a folder, a blank folder, Jasmine init, and it tells you right off the bat, you can do rake Jasmine to run a server, or do rake Jasmine CI to run the automated CI task. So just installing the gem, then Jasmine and init, we're going to get a folder structure. Init's going to create all this stuff and also give us different rake functionality that we can call to run our tests, fire up a server, run it in the browser, or run it more with Selenium as a default on our CI. So let's check this out. I do rake Jasmine here, fires up WebRick, browser open, so same thing here. Hit refresh, see if your test passed. It's nice how it breaks down, you can read the player, when the song is played, it should indicate. It's very friendly as long as you describe your specs in a great way. And then if you run the CI here, get 5 examples, 0 failures, ... should be similar, very familiar from your Ruby unit testing. So that's cool. And this actually fired up, you see Jasmine server started. This actually fires up a browser, runs Selenium, and shuts it down. That's what the CI version does. So how would you do this with jQuery? Let me show you this. This is without Ruby. So this is back to straight up JavaScript. There's a Jasmine jQuery which adds a lot of new matchers for you that you can utilize. So I'm not going to go through these, of course, but you see it's easier ways to grab stuff out of the DOM, basically. So this allows you a bunch of various DOM manipulation with jQuery. I'm going to show you with using lettering.js, which is a lightweight, easy to use, basically a span injector by a buddy of mine in town, Dave Rupert. That's him and me hanging out at the draft house, horsing around. Okay, so this is straight from the lettering.js website. Okay, you have a header with a class, right, with some text in it. We also have some jQuery set up to fire up, hey, run lettering, the jQuery plugin, on this, what matches this selector, right? No big deal there, basic jQuery. What is that? The result of that is it grabs each char from that header, throws spans between it, so you can more easily manipulate the output. So you see that? Something, just something space title, something space title. Grabs a span, puts a class on it for each one of those. Well, that's cool, right? So that way you can manipulate it and do cool things with individual characters of text. So what I'm going to do is the standalone folder structure, slap in the extra stuff. You see Jasmine jQuery. You see jQuery 1.6.1. We threw that in there as well. And then we also added lettering, which is the jQuery plugin that we're going to test. So I slapped those into the lib folder. I'm going to go to the spec.runner.html file and add these script files, so that they'll be testing through the browser that we pull up. And then let's start our specs, right? So I'm currently called lettering. And what you can do here is you can either load fixtures from a folder. It has a default path that it pulls from on the file system. Or you can say, hey, I just want to set my fixture to this DOM. This is my DOM I want to use. And then when you call stuff on it, it hits that fixture. So it's an easy way to do DOM setup inside your tests. Independent of your application at all. We're going to do a jQuery selector on it, some contrived type stuff, but hey, I want to say, expect it to be visible, right? This passes. Hey, I want to see if it has, 10 spans, And of course, I always go back to the 2 equal just because it's so familiar. Instead of grabbing another jQuery, I could easily just say, is there text at this point? But hey, grab it, jQuery selector, get the length. Is that equal to 10? Yeah, it passes. Should contain S as the text of the first span. Hey, go get the first span, it's text equal S. So very simple type stuff. So the first thing I showed you was testing without DOM, and here with jQuery you can easily do DOM manipulation and testing. Pretty cool, easy stuff. So you might say, right, what's the point of this? I just want to talk about unit testing in general here. Why do this, right? Well, I was like, hey, hey Dave, you don't need tests around your stuff. Like, how are you going to change this stuff? So what he can do is go in, pin down functionality, right? I know it's supposed to, with this test, it's supposed to create 10 spans, right? He can go in, pin down this functionality, and then every time he tweaks this plugin, he doesn't have to go, do a bunch of things. He just refresh the browser or run the CI and see ... He knows he's good to go. He's pinning down existing functionality with unit tests. So I think that's very powerful stuff to allow him to move fast in the future. And another one, hey, does it have to have class? That's a jQuery Jasmine selector. It does. The first one has this class. So easy selecting type stuff. All right, Jasmine with Rails. How do we go about this? So this is with bundler I'm showing. You throw the gem file, bundle install, Jasmine init, which we used before, which will generate our folder structure. You don't have to do that. And then you can break Jasmine, which opens up the web server and localhost 888 to run it to have it execute the secret test pass. Or you can do the CI way, rake Jasmine CI. So here's the folder structure generated. So this is inside your Rails project, right? So you have the JavaScript, public JavaScripts. Actually, I'm sorry, it throws it in the JavaScripts folder. This slide does not seem right. This is the generated Rails spec folder. Yeah, with Rails in the public folder of JavaScript. So we have the existing normal Rails stuff, prototype or whatever defaults you have set, jQuery, and it also throws in the player, the song. So it also, when you run the Jasmine init inside a Rails project, it gives you the example song and player that it does when inside the standard unzip. Then you can fire up, this is with rake Jasmine. You can fire up the browser and just refresh it and make sure your tests are working all right. Cool. No sweat. Okay. This was the Dr. Phil moment I wanted to have with you guys. I've been showing you some stuff here, but I've been showing you sort of the hard way, how you go through school, they teach you the hard way first. I want to show you something called Evergreen, which is just a super awesome gem that encapsulates a lot of this functionality inside of one spot. And I'll show you how easy it is to use this. All right, and also pictures, break up the eyes a little bit, found this on the internet. Gem install Evergreen. This is not the Evergreen project picture. It's a My Little Pony, obviously. Gem install Evergreen. It's going to install a bunch of stuff. So now we have the default folder path. Okay, this is not generated for you. You create this. So I install this gem. I'm going to go to a folder on my system, right? Create a public folder. Create a spec folder. That might seem familiar. Create a JavaScript folder where the specs are going to go. So I created these files and folders myself. I'm going to run Evergreen serve. It's going to fire up a server, fire the server so I can run this inside my browser. If you notice, there's nothing else in here. I don't have Jasmine in here. I don't have a JS Jasmine or anything. It's covered with the gem. I'll fire that up, run it. One spec, 0 failures. Cool. Move on. Evergreen run. CI with Selenium. I'll show you how to swap that out here in a minute. Default with Selenium. All right, so that's cool. With Rails 3, it's the same type of stuff. Put the gem in there. That's on the same line, but you require Evergreen Rails. Also, you definitely want to put this inside like your test, the test scope inside your gem file. You don't want this in production. You don't want people to go check out your tests in production. So what about CoffeeScript? If you went to Matt Thompson's talk yesterday, you probably saw some pretty cool stuff with CoffeeScript. So how would you use CoffeeScript to test your JavaScript? And what I'm referring to is writing your spec files in CoffeeScript. So I'm going to install CoffeeScript first. I do a brew install Node.js, add some paths, curl, the Node package management system, and then I'm going to install CoffeeScript. That's what I had to do to get this, to install CoffeeScript on my system, independent of Evergreen. Nothing to do with Evergreen, just how to install CoffeeScript. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add an _spec coffee file to this spec folder. I guess I didn't say it before, I didn't hammer this in, but like, you see how it's calculator _ spec? Evergreen knows that to look for that convention. And then it matches it up with the calculator file. So I'm going to throw _spec.coffee, change the file extension, and then I'm going to rewrite this test in CoffeeScript. So this, if you recall this from before, I'm going to require the calculator.js file, describe it, throw the before in there as well, throw the it with the assertion, you expect, you add it to equal this, right? So that's a lot less code. What's cool about this is, you don't have all the, of course, curly braces, you don't have the anonymous functions all up in your business. you can focus on the code, and that's why CoffeeScript's cool. And also coming from Ruby, this just seems to make a lot more sense. Yes, there's a white space, so it's not complete drop-in. But like recently, I was doing a lot of Ruby, and then I went back into JavaScript, and I was like, what is this curly brace? It was just baffling to me. So that's when I really saw the power of CoffeeScript. It's just, again, like switching context between RSpec and Jasmine. Same with, I'm not switching context between that and my CoffeeScript spec. So check this out. I just explained what that was. And look at that. 2 examples, 0 failures. So out of the box with Evergreen, I can just write a spec file, put a .coffee embedded in it, and it gets picked up by this. So I think that's pretty cool. I didn't have to do anything else. So 2 spec. So it's picking up the CoffeeScript test and the JavaScript test there. So you could even run them side by side. I'm testing straight JavaScript with CoffeeScript and straight JavaScript with straight JavaScript. So that is simple and easy and awesome. Definitely winning. And this is how I felt after I did that. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I installed the Evergreen gem. I mimicked the folder structure. Then I added a coffee file extension. Let me show you how to do this. How do you run the CI Headless thing? This is pretty easy. There's something called Jasmine Capybara WebKit. I had a little more trouble getting that going, so I just kind of went straight over to the Capybara WebKit without the specified for Jasmine. I had to go download and install the Qt binary package, which you get from, I guess, Nokia. Just Google it and grab it and install it. From there, it allows you, I mean, what does Headless mean? You hear it a lot. You may not know what that means, right? Basically, it's going to run my specs without needing to render a pixel. It's as if the Selenium is opening up, clicking the stuff, but it's not actually opening a browser and doing it. So it's nearly as fast as running a JavaScript engine like Node.js. And since it's a real browser environment, all the modules you normally use, like jQuery, backbone, whatever, work without any modifications. So it's like firing up Selenium, but not really, and doing it in a very fast manner through JavaScript. So it's really cool. So let's check this out. I did this, then I created in Evergreen, I created a config folder through evergreen.rb in there. And this is how you configure some stuff. So check this out. I required Capybara WebKit, and then here, remember this file did not exist. I created it, I showed you how it would have looked with Selenium in it. So you config driver Selenium is default. I said, you know what, WebKit. And just to show you examples of how you would switch, what folder it's looking into to run these specs, I put some folder directory examples up there. So this is kind of, a contrived example. I'm running 2 specs that add something together, right? But look at that. 4 seconds with the Selenium one and 1 second with the Headless one. It's contrived adding stuff together. Installed this and ran it. I was like, wow, I switched out the driver being used, config driver WebKit instead of config driver Selenium, and it's running. It's as if Selenium is opening up and clicking stuff. I mean, we're not clicking stuff here, but you get the gist. I mean, it's literally like a browser environment. So that is super awesome. Hey, what about Node.js, right? Well, they have plugins for that too. I mean, they have plugins for all this stuff. I installed something called Jasmine Node, Node specs.js, bam, passes. So this is, as if this is testing Node.js stuff. So you can use this to test any JavaScript. It's all there for you at your disposal. I'm going to show you a couple other cool utilities that I noticed. Like I said, they're just kind of coming out of the woodwork. They're all over the place. I talked to Keepers at a bar the other day, and he was excited I had this slide, so I decided to throw his head in there too. I knew he'd be even more excited about that. But Rosie, it's like Factory Girl for JavaScript, right? So all this stuff that they have, in Ruby now through gems and whatnot, they're sort of like redoing them in JavaScript because we're spending a lot more time in the client side using JavaScript, and there's libraries like this, Rosie, which is creating these default objects that you're going to use throughout your test instead of having to create them on the fly every time. You can go in here and define them and just reuse them. And I talked to Brandon, I said 2 days ago, and he said, yeah, it works. We still use it. I mean, this is legit stuff. This is a great example. I meant to talk to Noel a couple days ago to see if this is still being worked on. I haven't seen it commit to it in a while, but it's a great idea. Okay, see what this is? It says, hey, what this really means is I'm going to go look at a view that I already have in my Rails project, and grab the DOM from that to do my Jasmine test. So instead of having to define a fixture or set the fixture inside your actual spec, you say, hey, I know there's a controller with this DOM, with this JavaScript already in it. So I'm just going to go grab that. So it's kind of cool. That way you don't have to, recreate your DOM every time. You actually point to an existing view and run this against it. I meant talking about it, but I did not. So either way, it's a great concept. Jasmine writes, I noticed this like 2 days ago. I haven't tried Jasmine with Rails 3, so I'm not sure how well it works. Then I saw this, and this says, hey, pain-free CoffeeScript testing under Rails 3. So this, taps into the asset pipeline and whatnot, and allows you to easily test your JavaScript with Jasmine, with CoffeeScript, in a Rails 3.1 environment. So hey, it's all out there. This is a really cool website. Check this out, tryjasmine.heroku.com. This is actually where I got my CoffeeScript example. I took my calculator example, threw it in here, and it actually converts it to CoffeeScript. So that way you don't have to go and install it if you didn't want to do what I did. You can go to this website. You can actually write specs. See this? You have a source and a spec. So you can just write code here and run it. You don't have to go through the laborious task of downloading a JavaScript files from a zip, extracting from a zip file. You can just go to the browser. It actually has different scripts you can use. It has the jQuery Jasmine here as well. So you just go in a browser, write some source, hit the run button or whatever, and it tests the spec for you in the browser. So that is very, very cool to get you up and running. Just want to give you a wrap up. Unit testing, obviously, very important. This is your production code. This is code you care about. You want to make sure it works right. You put unit tests around it. JavaScript, it can and should be unit tested. You saw how easy it was to do. I showed you by itself, with Ruby, with Rails, with CoffeeScript. All that stuff was super, super easy to set up and use. And Jasmine is a great tool for it. RSpec-like syntax, BDD type structure, same context through your tests. So I think this is really cool stuff. I work for People Admin. We're hiring like most people. The difference is, though, if you worked at People Admin, you get to work with me. So that's the one difference. Very exciting. That's me. I'm on Twitter. We can talk about questions or other plugins that I missed that you guys may be aware of. How much time we got? A few minutes? Like 3 minutes? My slides are posted there, Jasmine, bit.ly jasmine-lscr. And my speaker rate, go, tell me what's up, see if I did a good job or not, see what I missed. But any questions or any cool plugins you guys know about that I might have missed? Karthik?
I was just going to ask you, since you mentioned summaries, but what do you guys do internally to deal with the whole, the fixture DOMs and keeping them updated, so that nobody changes an ID on a partial and it blows up the specs?
Well, with the specs, by default, you just set fixtures, right? Set little piece of DOM. I haven't used the other method. Because if you change your view, yeah, you have to know that I have But it's not views as much as you'd probably be changing the API of that function or the method. So your specs would probably catch that. That's what I'm going to say. I didn't repeat the question, did I? If you basically go change your view code, you'll have to go sync up your DOM fixtures inside your specs, right? And my argument is, well, what you're probably really changing is how the API interacts and not really the view code. You don't care, if it has 8 IDs on it. You just care that, hey, I'm going to get this ID and do something with it, right? So, if you change the function that calls it and finds this thing or matches off something, your spec should break. So you'll know you have to go change it and sync it up. Ideally, you'd go change the spec first, of course, but before you change the actual code. But, we'll see. Ben?
Are you running no
Yes.
Have you heard of anybody getting that QT if you're working on Lion yet?
I haven't heard. I was waiting until after this presentation to upgrade to Lion. The question is, does Qt work on Lion? It's got to, right? Oh, Karthik has Qt installed on Lion, so you can go do Headless, cool, Capybara WebKit. Use it with Capybara WebKit. It's awesome. Check it out. If not for this, for other stuff. Any other questions? I mean, it's cool and easy. Anything I missed? All right, guys, let's go eat some chicken fried chicken. Have a good conference. Have a good conference.